am a proud Asian American woman, and you will treat me with respect.
Turning Red is without a doubt the movie on this list which is the biggest victim of bad faith criticism. You see, edgy teenage boys hate this movie, but after rewatching it for this video, I can safely say that basically all of their criticisms are kinda stupid. Now yes, there are plenty of people who dislike this movie for perfectly valid, understandable reasons, but I'm sorry, if your basis for criticism is that you think the film is bad because it's explicitly made for teenage girls, then I think you need to get off the internet. Seriously, people will act like this movie is bad because, oh, I can't relate to this period story. Well, first of all, it is so much more than just a period story. Hell, the period stuff is actually pretty minor in the grand scheme of things. But more importantly, why is it even an issue if a movie is made for teenage girls and not for you? Different movies attract different audiences, and whilst you may gravitate less towards a movie like this, that shouldn't be a basis for slagging it off. If you want to criticize this movie, criticize it for its story or characters or how it handles its themes. Criticize it for normal reasons, and then that way, we can respectfully disagree on those opinions. But don't just criticize it for being a girls' movie. You're embarrassing yourself if you do that. Anyway, now that I've got that out of the way, let's talk about the movie itself and why I still really like it despite being a teenage boy myself. First of all, I just think that this is a really interesting and fun story all about growing up, and it has a lot of strong thematic elements to it. Now, on the surface, this story of a 13-year-old turning into a red panda sounds very strange, and that's because it is. But I personally think that it nonetheless works within the context of the film's themes. You see, there are obvious parallels between the panda transformation and teenage hormones, and this can be seen through the fact that the panda only comes out during extreme reactions. This reflects how teenagehood is often known for causing various extreme reactions. It's a pretty in-your-face parallel, but I think it works as the sheer absurdity of the film's premise helps to make the viewing experience quite entertaining and memorable in how it portrays these awkward years of change. Sometimes, life feels just as crazy as a silly fantasy movie like this. I personally think that this film is less worried about any literal allegory, as instead more focused on capturing the right vibe, and I think that the wackiness of this film perfectly captures the manic vibe of teenagehood. And alongside this absurd parallel to changing hormones, some parts of the Red Panda story definitely do feel like period allegories, and even the film itself draws upon these connections. But like I said at the start, whilst there are some references to it, I don't know if it's really fair to call the whole film a period piece, as it's only really a small part of the wider story of growing up. Instead, I would argue that the most important aspect of this movie is the way that it presents May's relationship with her mother, and how it changes as May grows and discovers herself over the film. May's panda is a way to creatively portray her changes as she gets older, but it's also a vessel for her to come to terms with what she's like, and can thus allow her to express herself even more than how she used to. Once again, this is something that all teenagers have to deal with, and it was cool to see this movie present a fun story of a 13-year-old discovering who she is in a creative way. But I also think that this idea of May's discovery of who she is links in well to her relationship with Ming. As we grow up, many of us can feel afraid to grow up differently to our parents, and we thus worry that we may end up disrespecting their legacy as a result. This fear is especially present within people like May, who have a lot of respect for their parents, and thus want to maintain that mutual respect. I thought that was a really interesting fear to see presented here, and I love the developments for both May and Ming within this film. It was great to see May stand up to her mum more and more as she gradually begins to care less about her approval, and instead she acts as her own woman, making her own choices. It was very satisfying to see. And then there's Ming, who I thought was an interesting character throughout, as she provided quite a unique take on family toxicity. You see, I wouldn't call Ming an abusive parent at face value, as she does very clearly care for Mei Mei. However, she nonetheless causes harm to her daughter because of her overprotective nature and unwillingness to accept when Mei does something wrong, which thus causes rifts in Mei's friend circle. It's something that a fair few mothers do, and it's never a good thing when it happens, but I like how this film exposes this issue and gives Ming a full arc where she grows past these toxic traits and fully accepts Mei for who she is now. She realizes her own mistakes and she grows past them, and that was really great to see. Ming could have easily been a Karen stereotype, but instead she's a well-rounded character who was satisfying to watch as she grew. So yeah, I thought that Mei Mei and Ming were both fantastically well realized characters, and that's good because they are the most important characters within the film. Although, that's not to say that the side characters aren't good as well, as I do also really like May's friends. I think that they all bring their own unique energy to them, which thus provides for a very interesting and consistently fun dynamic. They honestly help to make a lot of this film really funny for me. Oh, and speaking of which, I know people often like to call this film's humour cringe, but I personally didn't feel that way at all. To be honest, it felt very authentic to what 13-year-olds are actually like, and so I personally thought that it worked very well, and I honestly found it quite funny throughout. Although, in spite of this praise, I will still fully admit that the "my panda my choice" joke at the end of the film did still take a couple of years off my life. My sense of humour may be lowbrow, but I do still have my limits, and that joke passed it. But hey, at least Awooga is peak comedy. Seriously, I am so obsessed with this joke. Awooga! I don't know why I find it so funny.
Swan, what do you think you're doing?
Keeping the British end up, sir.
Anyway, whilst I'm on the topic of talking about criticisms for this movie, I will say that I definitely think that the final act is the weakest part here. You see, this movie did a great job at telling an absurdist, yet still relatively chilled story all about growing up and discovering yourself. And then it was contrasted massively by this big, over-the-top final battle with a twerking Mei. I don't know, it just felt really out of place to me, and was maybe a bit too dumb for my liking. But still, it was decently fun, even if it wasn't what I was really looking for in comparison to the rest of the story. Nonetheless, I do still really like Turning Red regardless, and I think that it is way too overhated. Maybe not every joke or idea works perfectly well for me, but I think that its themes and main characters are very well realised, and I can see why many people, particularly women and girls, resonated with this film a lot. It's very fun, the animation is vibrant and expressive, it's got well executed animal transformation, which I obviously like, and I just think that it's very interesting overall. And it has a lot of themes that I found myself resonating with a lot. Now granted, I do think that other films like Only Yesterday and Lady Bird tackle a lot of the same themes as this movie in much better ways, but still, this was a great effort nonetheless. Give it a fair chance if you haven't already. It is way more interesting and funny than some people will have you believe.
I'm not even sure what he looks like, but I'm sure...
What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age!
As I said earlier in the list, I was pretty confident before starting the marathon that the best batch of films from this list were the 2009 selection. However, I have to say that after watching all of these films, I actually think that the 2002 selection is an equally strong contender. Not only does it consist of back-to-back bangers, but it also doesn't have a single bad or mediocre film within its lineup. And this fact honestly surprises me because I was convinced before going in that Ice Age was a mediocre film. Yet, after rewatching it, I have to say that it is in fact a great movie, even if it is still the weakest of this batch, but only by a tiny little bit. Now, I think that the reason for why I assumed that this film was nothing special was for the simple fact that I grew up with all of the unnecessary cash grab sequels, and I'm particularly nostalgic for the third and fourth movies.
Penis!
And I think it's fair to say that these films are not exactly the best things ever, and I don't exactly remember much from them as a result of that. I mean, I remember the Simon Pegg character from the third movie and how cool he was, and I know that the fourth movie had Peter Dinklage as a primate pirate pioneer. I don't know where I remember that specific rhyme, to be honest. Oh, and I think I had a crush on the Jennifer Lopez Sabretooth as a kid. But overall, I feel like these movies just kind of went in one ear and out the other for me, and I honestly regret that I watched these movies all the time as a kid instead of the works of Studio Ghibli. Like, seriously, I was missing out on them. So yeah, as a result of my memories of the sequels, I was quite pessimistic about the first Ice Age movie before going in, because I just thought that it was going to be the same stupid and unmemorable mediocrity. Yet, it really surprised me in how good it actually was. I mean, for starters, I was shocked by how legitimately funny this film was. Now, I'm not going to say that every joke worked for me, but the ones which did work were easily the majority. I think that the reason for why I found the film so humorous and entertaining is because most of its humour came from simple, well-written character banter, which is something that always works for me and helps to make any movie that bit more entertaining. Manny, Sid and Diego all play off each other so well, and their back and forth dynamics are hysterical throughout. They work because their personalities couldn't be more different from one another, as Manny is grumpy, Diego is aggressive, and Sid is just stupid. This clash leads to so much comedic potential, which this film absolutely takes advantage of, and it's just brilliant to see throughout. And alongside the great banter, there are also a few really fun and wacky sequences within this film which help to make the viewing experience even more entertaining, such as the sliding sequence and that whole dodo bird scene. Holy shit, that dodo scene was legendary. It was so over the top in the best possible way. I particularly liked how many innocent dodos died a horrible death. That was really funny. Oh, and let's not forget about the absolute Chad that is Scrat. We all love Scrat in this household, and if you don't like him, get out. Yeah, his scenes are always a highlight for me, even in the sequels, and I will never tire of his nut hijinks. Now, is he ultimately pointless to the grander story? I mean, yeah, of course he is. However, he's a major contributing factor to the heart and charm of the franchise in all of the movies, and I just can't imagine them without him. But anyway, in spite of the funny Scrat and Dodo Bird stuff, I still think the character dynamics were what ultimately made the film so entertaining for me. And alongside that, the characters also helped to give the film its other main positive trait: heart. From memory, this is the one Ice Age movie to actually have a substantial amount of heart and emotion behind it. It follows a really simple yet endearing story all about returning Ice Age baby back to his father. But alongside that basic narrative, we also get to see our main characters develop and change significantly over time. Honestly, I was surprised to realize that the main star of the show within this movie was actually Diego. I always remembered him being a pretty nothing third wheel within the sequels, yet here, he was actually a character, with an arc. Seriously, he started out as a straight up villain who wanted to kill a baby, before he gradually develops into a hero by the end of the film, after joining a herd with people who actually care for him and have his back, instead of just being in a pack with others who tolerate him and only use him for his skills. His change is slow and gradual, but it feels natural, and you can especially tell how much he reconsiders his position in the world after Manny almost dies whilst trying to save him. It's a really great character journey. Whilst the film does ultimately follow a lie reveal plotline, it doesn't feel too cliche within this instance because the circumstances of the lie are much more compelling. Plus, there's no drawn out argument within this movie. Yeah, Manny and Sid are mad at first, which is understandable I feel, but they soon put everything aside when they realise that Diego has no reason to lie any further, and so they trust him and ultimately work together to defeat the villains. So yeah, Diego is great within this movie. Granted, part of me wishes that Diego did actually sacrifice himself at the end of the film as originally planned, as the fake out death scene itself is kinda drawn out and tedious when you know he comes back at the end. Also, considering the fact that he never has anything to do with in the sequels, it probably would have been for the best to get rid of him now. However, at the same time, I don't think that childhood me could have coped with him dying, so I don't actually mind too much that he ends up living. So yeah, Diego is great, and luckily he's not the only brilliant character, as I also really liked Manny in this movie. Not only was he a freaking mood throughout the first half of the film, but he also had a lot of depth and heart to his character. As I said before, he nearly dies whilst trying to rescue Diego, and I think that really shows how much more empathetic he has become since meeting his new friends. It's a really great moment, but it's nothing in comparison to the phenomenal cave painting scene. Holy fuck. How did I forget about this scene? It is genuinely one of the most devastating and powerful backstory scenes, all told through beautiful visuals. It's just a masterfully well done scene, and I damn near shed a tear at it. I'm not joking, it's that good. But not only is it powerful, it fully links back into Manny's character and how he has to move on from his past trauma. And he does this by putting aside any malice that he might have in order to help the next generation of humans, despite them being the species who killed his family. It's just beautiful and poetic and perfect to see. Part of me wants to say that the introduction of Ellie and Peaches within the sequels puts a damper on the scene, but I honestly don't think that it does, as it is still powerful in of itself, as evident from my emotional investment which came from it, in spite of my avid viewings of the sequels. So yeah, Manny and Diego are banger characters. And then there's Sid, who just kind of exists. Now, I do like Sid well enough, and he does have his fair share of funny moments. However, he doesn't really contribute much to the film outside of a few plot points here and there. Sid's main role within this movie is to be comic relief, and not much else. You see, Manny and Diego's character arcs kinda happen around Sid, which means that Sid doesn't really contribute much to their characters, and so doesn't add much to the overall narrative. Unlike Donkey and Shrek, Sid isn't really a catalyst for any of the arcs, and so he kinda feels a bit one note as a result. Oh, and on the topic of the Shrek comparisons, yeah, the Shrekification of this movie is really obvious to see sometimes. Oh look, we've got the big grumpy guy and comic relief sidekick. How original. Although to be fair, having a third member of the team who just so happens to be a feline assassin can't exactly be called a Shrek 2 copy, because Ice Age predated that film. But still, Sid is kinda just an inferior version of Donkey at the end of the day, and that, alongside the dated animation and a pretty underwhelming and awkwardly staged final act, are all my main criticisms with this movie. In spite of these flaws though, I would still call Ice Age a great movie overall. Yes, the sequels and Ice Age baby memes may have previously tainted it in my mind, however, I am happy to report that I have been enlightened by the truth. This film actually deserves your attention, and I would happily say that it deserved a nomination this year in comparison to everything else on the shortlist. I would absolutely recommend giving it another go at some point if you've also written it off for years. Hopefully, you'll get a lot more out of it than you previously remembered. This may be a hot take, but I don't think that we should call Treasure Planet underrated anymore. The thing is, whilst it definitely did flop when it came out, it has since gained such a loyal cult following of people who sing its praises so much, to the point that most people are now aware of its existence and have actually seen it. Plus, the general consensus of the movie is pretty positive on the whole. So yeah, when considering all of the factors, I'd argue that Treasure Planet is no longer underrated, and is instead, just rated. At least, that's what I personally think. Anyway, what do I think of the movie? Well, I kind of blend in with the crowd when it comes to my opinions on this film, as I personally think that it is a great movie overall. But I do have some substantial flaws with it here and there. Now, none of these flaws kill the movie for me, don't worry, but they do stop it from being a masterpiece in my mind. But first, let's talk about the good. As I'm sure you can all guess by now, I personally loved the main duo of Jim Hawkins and John Silver. They were both flawlessly executed characters, especially Silver, who was just so interesting and well written. Basically, the audience finds out early on that Silver's going to backstab Jim in order to steal all of the treasure. However, Jim doesn't immediately know this until around the halfway mark where he figures it out. So, Silver is technically a Disney twist villain, but in this film, this isn't treated as a big, final, shocking twist or anything, as instead more of a second act shake-up. And as a result of this, it's clear that John Silver wasn't made to be an antagonist as a surprise, and instead, he was used as a way to show character growth. Whilst he has selfish goals at the start of the film, we get to see him slowly change over the course of the movie, as he begins to warm up to Jim. After a little bit of time, he begins to act like the father figure that Jim never had, and their dynamic is just so sweet and endearing within these scenes, before they eventually turn ugly after the betrayal. But then, this all culminates within the ending, where Silver willingly gives up his treasure in order to save Jim's life. That was just a brilliant showcase of his character growth, and I adored that moment. And alongside Silver, I do still really like Jim Hawkins. He's not as complex as Silver, but his dynamic with him is just pitch perfect, and he is always endearing and enjoyable to watch. Also, I'm probably just stupid, but it honestly took me until the credits to realise that Jim was played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt. To be honest, I think I just forgot that the dude could voice act, as I always associate him with live action roles. Anyway, alongside the great main characters, I also enjoyed some of the side characters. Morph is an adorable little gremlin who I absolutely loved, and I also found Doppler and Captain Amelia to be really entertaining, especially Amelia because I liked her Great British wit. I also absolutely love the visual style of this movie. Oh man, this film just looks gorgeous, particularly the space scenes, and all of it really made me realise how much I actually miss 2D animation. Not to mention, I also just generally found the world building really interesting here. Within this movie, we've got classic ship designs contrasted with futuristic space stuff, which should, under normal circumstances, clash hard, but this clash is honestly the main reason for why I like the aesthetic of this movie. It's just really unique and memorable for me. I already love sci-fi as a genre, and I love it even more here when it's blended with a classic pirate adventure. It all works surprisingly well. So yeah, I love the presentation and the main characters, which therefore means that I loved most of this movie. But not all of it, as I do still have some major problems. Honestly, the side characters are pretty weak in this movie overall. Now, I know I just said that I liked Doppler and Amelia, but I'll be honest, my enjoyment of them doesn't change the fact that they still get sidelined hard by the second half of the film, which was pretty disappointing. And alongside them, the other pirates are really not memorable in the slightest. Not even the spider dude, who felt like he was built up as someone more important than he actually was. Oh, and speaking of which, there's a really weird plotline where one of the main crewmates is actually killed by the spider dude at one point, but Jim thinks that he was responsible for his death, as he believes they didn't tie a rope hard enough. Now, to me, this felt like this would be a really major plot beat with some strong drama to it, yet it feels completely glossed over after just 5 minutes. Like, Jim feels bad for one scene, but then Silver goes over and gives him a pep talk saying, "It wasn't your fault, me boy," and then everyone promptly forgets about it until Jim learns the truth later when the spider dude dies. It really just feels like there were very few consequences for this major scene, as no one really seemed to care about the dead dude. It just felt very weird to me. And speaking of forgetting about someone, I didn't like how much Jim's mother was forgotten about. Once again, she was built up as someone important, but then she didn't even go on the quest and didn't even appear within the movie until the very end. What? Why? Parental relationships seem like such a key theme within this movie. I don't get why the one parental figure that Jim actually has isn't in the movie more. Once again, it just felt weird to me. And the final character blunder that I have to mention is Ben. I hate this stupid ass robot. He is so goddamn annoying, and the main reason for why is because he feels the need to scream every line of dialogue, and it just got so grating after a while. Even when he had his mind restored, he was still screaming, and I still hated him. I would say that he let down significant parts of the second half of the film, but to be fair, the second half did kinda lose me a bit on its own. Like a lot of adventure stories, the adventure itself is much better and more interesting than the destination, and by the time that we got to the trademark treasure planet within this film, things became a lot less interesting for me. The pacing slowed down quite a lot, and the characters kinda felt like they were just dawdling around for a bit. I was honestly kinda ready for the film to wrap up long before it did, because I just wasn't as engaged as I was during the whimsy of the first half. But still, at the end of the day, the stronger elements of this film really do carry it in my mind, and that means that I still think that this movie is great. I definitely don't think that this is a masterpiece like other people do, but it does still have plenty of masterpiece elements to it, and I can definitely understand the appeal for so many. However, I'm probably a bit more critical of the movie because this was my first time watching it, so I have no prior personal connection or nostalgia to it. But still, I appreciated a lot about it and would happily watch it again sometime. What can I say? My sci-fi and adventure movie fan brain just go burr sometimes.
Who's the king of the beach?
Surf's Up is without a doubt one of the most unique films from this entire list when you look at it primarily from how its story is presented. You see, this ain't your usual animated film. Instead, it is actually a mockumentary film which features many of the hallmarks of documentary filmmaking, such as interviews with the characters, an authentic looking shaky cam, camera crews being acknowledged, character interactions to feel very natural rather than scripted, and as a whole, this film tried really hard to capture what mockumentaries really feel like, despite being in the animated medium. And to me, that's just so creative and cool. It is an animated film which is honestly like nothing else I have ever seen, particularly from a major studio. Now yes, there is still another animated documentary which we will talk about later on this list. However, Flea is still very different to Surf's Up in terms of its presentation, as Flea is an animated retelling of a true story being told by a real person. Whereas with Surf's Up, this is obviously a fictional narrative which just uses the documentary style as a way to tell the story, hence why it's classed as a mockumentary in a similar vein to something like Spinal Tap. And yes, it really works, and it helps to make this film so damn memorable for me. Now yes, I will admit that the main reason for why I enjoyed Surf's Up as much as I did was because of its presentation. However, that doesn't change the fact that this movie does still have a lot of merit outside of that fact, which all help to make this a great movie, even without the style. I mean, first of all, the story idea is a fun one. It's a movie all about surfing penguins and Cody trying to succeed at the championship. What more do you want? It's essentially a sports movie, and it has all of the hallmarks that other great sports movies have, such as a likable underdog training hard with a mentor. It's a classic story executed well here, and even though it's been done many times before, I see that the memorable surfing penguin idea helps to keep the film memorable and fun for me. However, I think that the main thing that this film has going for it, which helps it to stand out from other similar films alongside its presentation, is its characters and messages. Firstly, I'll talk about the characters. Now I gotta say, I am definitely glad that Cody is a likable character here, which is very surprising considering who his voice actor is. Whilst he does start out a bit arrogant, he's always entertaining to watch, and because he's the underdog, you actually want to see him succeed. Plus, he goes through a great arc which I'll talk about later when talking about the messages. It could have been so easy to make Cody a prick, but luckily, the film remains enjoyable because Cody's actually well written and likable. And this is the obligatory moment where I say don't watch Surf's Up 2. Granted, I've only seen clips from that movie, but I already hate it based off those clips alone. Anyway, alongside Cody, we also have the legendary Chicken Joe, who is just the absolute best, isn't he? Find someone in your life who would care for you in the same way that Chicken Joe cares for Cody. And finally, there's Big Z, who is definitely quite similar to other retired mentor characters in films. However, that isn't a bad thing at all, as he is still fantastic. He's funny, sympathetic, and he plays off Cody really well. I also really like the decision to show the audience Cody's admiration for Big Z before we find out who he is. It just allows us to grow a stronger connection to him right off the bat. So yeah, these characters make this film pretty entertaining on the whole. Although, I don't think that they're all great. I honestly can't even remember the name of Cody's girlfriend, and Tank is about as generic of a rival as you can get. But these weak characters aren't a big deal for me, as the good characters are still really good. And alongside the characters, the message of the film is really strong. Basically, this is a story all about ensuring that you have fun with your passion, instead of obsessing over being the best and trying to succeed. Now yes, this is a simple message which other films like Whiplash have definitely portrayed better, but it's still an important message nonetheless, and it's always great to hear within a movie. I like the way that Cody learned this message by giving up the win in order to help Chicken Joe. It was a heartwarming moment, and it also paved the way for Cody to fully connect with and understand why Big Z retired, which definitely helped to strengthen their bond by the end. So yeah, overall, this film was a great time. It's definitely got its flaws like some unfunny poop and pee jokes, and as I said before, not every character is that interesting or fleshed out, and there is a lot of familiar territory being tread here, but I honestly don't mind too much, as this is still an incredibly simple, yet unique and creative film, particularly when it comes to its presentation. Granted, I do enjoy Meet the Robinsons and The Simpsons movie, but I'm honestly glad that such a unique and potentially risky film got some recognition at the Oscars, even if it is definitely the weakest film of the 2007 batch by far. And yeah, there's not really much else for me to say, other than I'm mad at the fact that I never saw this film as a kid, yet I saw Happy Feet. God, I wish I watched more good movies as a kid. My taste was shit back then. A general rule of thumb to keep in mind when it comes to my history with some of these films is the fact that, outside of a couple of the Studio Ghibli movies, I was completely unfamiliar with the vast majority of the foreign language stuff on this list. Not only had I not seen most of them before, but for many, I hadn't even heard of them before looking at the full list of films that I needed to watch for this list. However, there was one obscure foreign language film which I had actually seen before making this list, and that movie was A Cat in Paris. Of all movies. And why was I aware of this film's existence over some of the others, you might ask? Well, you see, I actually saw this movie around 7 years ago in my Year 7 French class. Yeah, I'm not kidding. My old French teacher used to put on a French film for us to watch and enjoy at the end of each school year, and in Year 7, the film we watched was A Cat in Paris. And honestly, I remember really liking it, and after rewatching it all these years later, I still really like it. I honestly got a lot of entertainment out of this simple, yet fun little action crime romp. It's got an engaging story with plenty of cool sequences like rooftop chases and heists, and it's also got plenty of great comedic moments with all the mobsters. And yeah, that's kind of it actually. The film is definitely one of the simplest films of this list when it comes to its execution, but I don't mind too much, as the film succeeded in pretty much everything that I wanted it to do, and as a result, I just found myself enjoying pretty much everything about this movie, especially the mobster stuff, and this was largely thanks to the mob boss himself, Victor Costa, who was just chewing up the scenery in every moment he was on screen. He was delightfully evil and really entertaining, and I also loved his shenanigans with his goons. Any scene with all of these guys in it was just great. Also, as a bonus, one of the goons is literally called Monsieur Hulot. God, I love the French sometimes. And alongside the comedic villains, the story was pretty solid despite being quite simple, and it had some neat twists and moments of tension sprinkled throughout, particularly when the girl's maid is revealed to be tied to Costa. And on the whole, I'd say that, particularly within the second half, this film can get really exciting, and it was generally pretty engaging on the whole. I was never bored with this movie, and was instead always having a really fun time, or I was hooked in by the various chase sequences, which were balanced out well with plenty of slower, sneakier scenes which remained compelling. Okay, sure, the dramatic beats with the mother could have been a bit stronger and more fleshed out, and I definitely would have liked a bit more of the cat in Paris, as the cat itself was a legend in the few scenes that I was in, but I ultimately didn't mind these things too much, as I was still having a great time with this film. It was just super fun. Oh, and that's without mentioning the animation, which I also really liked. It reminded me a lot of various different crime comics, and that really fit the tone and story of this film well, whilst also being pretty cool visually. The night vision scene especially was really well done in terms of the animation. The dream sequences were also pretty cool visually, if a bit disconnected from the narrative sometimes. So overall, I thought that A Cat in Paris was a really solid, enjoyable movie. I'd happily watch it again, and I'm really glad that it was nominated, especially as it managed to bring back memories of Year 7 French class. Actually, I take that back. Year 7 French was awful, and I don't want to be reminded of it. Screw you, movie, for bringing back those memories. Also, leave that poor dog alone.
You've dabbled with aliens. Now meet the genuine article.
As I'm sure you all know by now, I am British, and as a result of this fact, I like Greggs sausage rolls, I complain about the weather all the time, and I am very proud of a lot of British media. I think it's honestly fair to say that every person is a little bit patriotic to some extent, even if they don't show it on the outside. No matter what you may think of your country, there's bound to be at least something that you like about it and take pride in. And this is no different for me. Whilst I am very critical of the UK a lot of the time, I still take pride in various aspects of it, and the media is one of them. Specifically fictional media though, the news and reality shows can both go fuck themselves. I honestly love watching British movies and shows, ranging from the iconic to the lesser known. In fact, I honestly don't watch many TV shows, but most of the shows that I do watch actually come from this country. I'm particularly a frequent enjoyer of British sitcoms, as well as the dark comedy masterpiece that is Inside Number 9. What can I say, I just love the British sense of humour. But back on the topic of movies, there is one animation studio which I think perfectly encapsulates why I love British movies, as well as our special brand of humour, and that studio is, of course, Aardman Animations. Now, whilst I wouldn't call them the greatest animation studio of all time, I still absolutely adore Aardman for their unprecedented charm and British wit, and that's on top of their stellar stop-motion animation. Not to mention, with the exception of the incredibly mid Early Man, they are a very consistently great studio, which thus makes their back catalogue really fun to revisit. I am always rewatching the works of Aardman, whether it's classic Wallace and Gromit, Chicken Run, Arthur Christmas, which is one of my favourite animated movies ever and my favourite feature film they've ever done. Check out my old video on it if you want detailed thoughts, as I obviously can't talk about it on this list. And, of course, all of their films which are nominated for this award. All 5 of these films are bangers, and I think it's pretty telling that it took this long for me to talk about one of them. This means that even though Farmageddon is my least favourite Aardman film on this list, I still think that it's a great movie on the whole. Just like with the rest of Aardman's output, this is an endlessly endearing and charming film which left me laughing out loud throughout. Not to mention, it looks absolutely gorgeous thanks to its stop motion. And thanks to these factors, this is a film which I just have a blast watching. However, the reason for why I don't think it's quite as good as the other Aardman films on this list is because of the story, which I found a bit weak here, I'll admit. Compared to the other films, the plot was a bit meandering at points, particularly around the middle, and I found the villain really unmemorable. Aardman is usually great at making villains, as we will see later, but this lady was just kind of forgettable. Granted, she does have a really sweet redemption at the end of the film, but that doesn't stop her presence from feeling less than special. I honestly think that the nameless hazmat suit guys and the little robot were way more funny and memorable. Oh, and speaking of the side characters, I think that I would have liked a bit more of the other sheep. They brought a lot of their own unique humour to the first Shaun the Sheep movie, and I just would have liked to have seen more of them here. Although, to be honest, I think I'm just saying this because I wanted to see more of Timmy, who might just be the greatest character in the history of fiction. Anyway, alongside the plot and characters, I also thought that the music was kind of off here. The instrumental soundtrack was great, but the pop song Needle Drops felt very out of place and kinda corny. Honestly, as a result of these moments, it sometimes felt like this movie was trying to be more American, or something. Just the thought of Americanized Aardman makes me want to gag. Flushed Away was bad enough in that regard, we don't need another one. Anyway, those are my only real flaws with this movie, and they're admittedly rather minor all things considered. Everything else about this movie is great. As I said, this movie is wonderfully charming, and I think a big reason for why that is thanks to the presentation of the Shaun the Sheep franchise. Now, I'm sure you all know that Shaun the Sheep was originally a Wallace and Gromit side character, who got his own banger TV show. But the unique thing about this show is the fact that it has no dialogue, just like the Red Turtle and the Sylvain Chamain movies. All of the dialogue is instead replaced with bars and human grunts, and this choice really helped to give the show a very unique charm, and I'm so happy it was retained for these 2 movies. It just adds so much to the identity and sense of humour of Shaun the Sheep. I also personally found the dialogueless nature of these films a lot easier to follow than those other examples I just mentioned, because this is a light-hearted comedy franchise which uses its dialogueless technique as a way to show a lot of brilliant visual gags, rather than to tell a complex story. It's easy to understand what's happening because things are quite straightforward and entertaining here, rather than being weird. And as a result, this film just appeals to my taste a lot more, in a similar vein to how I prefer the works of Buster Keaton to the silent film dramas like Joan of Arc or Metropolis. So yeah, this presentation adds so much to this film, and it leads to some amazing jokes and visuals, which are entirely delivered through either the movements of the characters or the various sight gags. Although, interestingly enough, I did still really like the way that sound was used within this film. I know that sounds weird to say that for a film without dialogue, but I loved the way that Lula would repeat various sounds she heard throughout the film. It just added a lot to the charm of her character, and thus made her even cuter than she already was. But alongside this unique style and charm, I'd say that another reason for why I got so much enjoyment out of this film was because of the fact that I love sci-fi. I mentioned this before in the Treasure Planet segment, but I am a big fan of this genre, and this film just delights me as a result because it has so many references to classic sci-fi media, such as 2001: A Space Odyssey, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Alien, War of the Worlds, A Grand Day Out, and even Modern Times, my favourite sci-fi film. And, as I'm sure many of you can guess, very few things on this list brought me as much joy as the Doctor Who references present within this film. Bro, seeing both Tom Baker's Sonic Screwdriver and the Daleks were both amazing on their own. But I fanboyed so hard when I first saw this guy, who straight up cosplayed as Tom Baker before getting scared of the Daleks and running into a blue box. I mean, I know it's a Portaloo, but it still counts. Now, I know I'm biased when I'm saying this, but this scene is amazing and there's a large reason for why I love this movie so much. This is how you know that Aardman is a dedicated team consisting of proud Brits who represent our culture in the best way that they can. And as a Whovian, moments like this in films and shows always make me smile. Although, I would have ranked this film even higher on this list if it was Patrick Troughton who was in the scene instead, as he is the best Doctor. Anyway, I also really like the original ideas presented within this movie. It got very creative and inventive with its sci-fi ideas at many points, such as with Lulu's aforementioned repeating sounds, as well as that really cool moment where she uses her powers to show Shaun a galaxy, via household objects. It once again proves how creative Aardman is and how amazing their visuals are. So overall, I honestly do love Farmageddon, and yes, my love does extend beyond just the Doctor Who references. It's obviously not the deepest film in the world, even if it does have a nice arc for Shaun where he learns how damaging his reckless actions can be. However, I don't really care too much, as Shaun the Sheep is all about the comedy more than anything else, and it absolutely nails its humour every time, and this film is no exception. It's hilarious, endlessly charming, a wonderful love letter to classic sci-fi, and it just looks amazing. I love it to bits, and I promise that I'm not just saying that because I'm a British Doctor Who fan. It's still a lovely movie outside of that, even if the other Aardman movies on this list have got better stories and villains who are even funnier. But before we discuss all of them, we've got some other movies to talk about which sadly don't feature Tom Baker cosplayers or Daleks, even though they absolutely should.
We're gonna set this sleepy town alight.
Okay, real talk, what was with Brother Aswell's character design in The Secret of Kells? Surely I can't be the only one who thinks that this is a pretty racist caricature of a black man, especially for 2009 standards. I really don't know who thought that this was a good idea. Although, to be fair, there could be a legitimate folk reason for why it looks like that, and if that's the case, then please let me know, as I really don't want to believe that the filmmakers created some kind of borderline minstrel's character for their movie for no reason. Either way, I just thought that was worth bringing up. Anyway, with that controversial talking point out of the way, I really like The Secret of Kells. Now, I want to start this segment by saying that I had never actually seen a cartoon saloon film before starting this list, and damn it, I'm mad that I never gotten around to seeing them, because these movies are absolutely gorgeous, and Kells is no exception. This has got to be one of the most unique looking and stunning 2D animated films that I have ever seen. Not only does it have a really cool Celtic folk feel to it, which really immerses you into old-timey Ireland, but the environments also look amazing and the colours really pop. Plus, the general art direction is incredibly strong within many sequences. There are so many really simple scenes which are truly elevated by how amazing the visuals are, such as with that amazing scene where Brendan tries to get the eye. That was truly something special to behold. And alongside the stunning sequences, I also love the way that the visuals portrayed certain things like the Vikings. Instead of actually seeing the Vikings, we are shown these brutal, shadowy figures who reflect how scary the Vikings actually are to the characters. Yet in spite of this creative portrayal, it's still very easy to identify them as Vikings because of certain visual features such as the beards and historically inaccurate helmets.
There you are, young man. What do you think of that now, eh? A Viking helmet.
Maybe.
What do you mean, maybe? What do you think it is, a space helmet for a cow?
So yeah, as you can clearly see, the visuals for this movie are off the charts. Oh, and I also love the music here. Once again, it feels very distinct from any other movie on this list due to how integrated it feels into Celtic Irish culture, and it just sounds absolutely beautiful. So overall, this film has such a great vibe to it thanks to the way that it's presented. And I'm certain that this accounts for 90% of my praise towards this movie, because yeah, to be honest, the story for this film is really nothing special, and that's why I ultimately haven't ranked it higher on this list. I mean, the story is definitely still enjoyable, but it is a bit too simple for my taste. It only really consists of Brendan and brother Aidan writing a book together, and that's kinda it. It doesn't really have much else going on. I mean, sometimes Brendan went into the woods to get some stuff, but this really didn't happen as much as I expected it to, and I was a little bit disappointed by that, to be honest, as, more than anything, I really wanted to see more from Aisling, as these scenes in the woods were the only times where she properly appeared, and these scenes were pretty few and far between. I just wanted to know more about her, and I hope that we could get more of these scenes so that we could actually spend some significant time with her, yet she's barely in the film all things considered. Instead, most of the runtime is spent in this one village, and not much really happens here until the final act. Although, I really don't want to make it out like these slow scenes are bad or anything, as there is still a certain charm to the simplicity of this film, as the really simple plot allows for the runtime to primarily focus on the characters, who are thankfully really enjoyable to watch. I particularly enjoyed the main dynamic between Brendan and brother Aiden, and as I implied earlier, I did love the few scenes that we had with Aisling. Panga the cat is also awesome. As you can probably guess, adding a cat into this movie is an automatic win in my books. So yeah, I did enjoy most of the character stuff here in spite of the slow pace. However, at the same time, I admittedly found Brendan Gleeson's character to not be all that interesting. Obviously Gleeson killed it behind the mic, but his character kinda consisted of nothing more than your generic authority figure who's all like, "Oh, you can't leave the walls, Brendan, and you can't write a book either." I am so sorry to all my Irish viewers, that was a terrible idea, I shouldn't have tried to do an Irish accent. Anyway, I get where he was coming from in these moments, as the danger he spoke about was very serious, but until the very end of this film, these demands honestly felt like his only personality trait. Oh, and speaking of the ending, I thought that was a bit dumb at points. Now don't get me wrong, I did love how dark it got, and I really appreciate the fact that this film did not hold back in showing the brutality of the Vikings and the danger that they truly posed. However, at the same time, I just found it absolutely ridiculous that Brendan Gleeson survived this Viking attack. I mean, come on, the dude was shot and then stabbed when he was down. No one could have survived that, and yet he somehow did? What? Is he just built different or something? I don't know what it was. All I know is that it kind of took me out of the film a bit because of how illogical it felt. Like, the film literally frames it as if he was killed, yet he somehow wasn't. I don't really get it. Oh well, it at least leads to a nice reunion with Brendan by the end, but as a whole package, I'd say that I was only truly engaged with the Secret of Kells during the wood scenes and the final act. The rest of the film, meanwhile, was just a bit meandering for me, and unlike the slow-paced Studio Ghibli films, I didn't really find the themes all that interesting to justify the lack of any real plot. And whilst I did enjoy the characters, they definitely weren't the most interesting people in the world, and so they couldn't really carry the film for me. But still, the animation is amazing, the score is lovely, Irish accents are always music to my ears, so I naturally loved any moment where a character just talked, and once again I want to apologise for my bad Irish accent earlier, and I definitely feel like this is a film which fans of folktales would get a lot out of. I'll admit that personally, with one major exception, folk fantasy stories aren't really my kind of thing, but I can definitely appreciate how films like this can be right up someone's alley. This film did its own thing really, really well, and I certainly respect it a lot. Not much else to say other than give it a watch, as it certainly deserved a nomination. Although, I would still sacrifice its nomination in a heartbeat in favour of Mary and Max if I couldn't remove The Princess and the Frog from the nominee list. Seriously, Mary and Max is just a masterpiece.
Hello, I am a robot.
Robot Dreams is a really simple, yet charming and endearing little movie, which I think has plenty of interesting themes and ideas to it. But whilst I do really like it, I don't know if I'm quite as head over heels in love with it as some other people seem to be. Like, it's still really good, but I can't lie that I sometimes found it a bit too chilled out and without substance at many points, and I definitely think that it's one of those films which would have been much better as a short film rather than being stretched to a feature length, as it did sometimes feel a tad dragged out. So yeah, I had some pacing issues with this film, and I just didn't find it as special as other people found it to be when looking outside of its themes and charm. However, just because I feel this way doesn't mean that the film isn't still a cracker, which I appreciated a lot about. And now I'm going to spend the rest of this segment praising Robot Dreams because it really is a great movie. First of all, I mentioned the charm of this movie a few times now, so I'll start by talking about that. You see, just like Farmageddon and many others on this list, Robot Dreams is a dialogueless movie, which tells its story entirely through its fantastic visuals. Seriously, the animation is fantastic here. And luckily, this is a film which I was also able to follow along with really easily because of how simple it was. And because of its lack of dialogue alongside its endearing cast of characters and fun world, the film ends up becoming hella charming for me throughout. But the main reason for why I really like this film is thanks to the story and themes. You see, Robot Dreams is a story all about the inevitability of friends drifting apart from each other over time. Within this film, the dog and the robot are the bestest of friends. The dog wanted a friend because he's quite lonely, and so he built the robot and they immediately bonded to the sweet sounds of September by Earth, Wind and Fire. I'm sure you all know that song very well.
Do you remember when it first started, September?
However, The pair of them end up separated after the robot malfunctions and ends up stranded on a beach. And annoyingly, the dog can't retrieve him because the beach is closed for the winter months. And because companies and lawyers are all assholes, no one sympathizes with the dog's plight to get him back, in spite of the fact that it would literally take 5 minutes at most to drag the robot out or power him up properly again. So the dog has to spend months trying to deal with his loneliness, which doesn't go too well for him as he gets quite depressed at many points. He can't even get a girlfriend in this time as this chick just randomly leaves him for no reason. Meanwhile, the robot is left to lie on the beach where he was ripped apart bit by bit until he is removed from the area entirely and smashed up before the dog can find him. So now, our main duo are as far from each other as you can possibly get, and so they're unlikely to ever see each other again, and as a result, they are both forced to move on. They're upset at having to do this at first, but eventually they start to enjoy themselves again. Now this is a really simple outline for a story like this, but it's effective at showing the ways that friends can drift apart through no fault of their own. It's quite upsetting, but it's not the end of the world, as you can always move on and find new friends as you progress through life. So yeah, this is all great, but nothing mind-blowing I'd say. That is, until the very ending, which I thought was masterfully well done. It caught me off guard, but it's the part which has stuck with me the most within this film. You see, the robot finds the dog and his new robot boyfriend for the first time after being rebuilt, and so he tries to get the dog's attention back by playing September once again, as he hopes that it will reignite that initial bond between them. The dog hears the song, and the pair have this amazingly well-directed dance sequence over 2 different locations at the same time. But eventually, the song stops, and the characters don't reunite. They've both drifted apart so much over the year that they decide to move on with their lives instead of carrying on from where they left off. The two folks now have different new friends and live separately, and their lives are different to how it was before, and they arguably don't need each other as much as they used to. And so, they part ways. Whilst this ending is undeniably quite tragic and emotional and has forever ruined September for me, it was nonetheless brilliantly executed and was a perfect ending to the themes that were built up throughout this film. As I said, it's okay for friends to part ways over time. It may hurt and you may or may not ever see them again, but that doesn't take away from the good times that were had in the past. Oh great, as I'm saying this, all I can think of is the camping episode of Bluey, and just thinking about that episode makes me want to cry. God damn it. But anyway, back to Robot Dreams. I thought that it had a very bittersweet, thought-provoking ending, and it's for this reason alone that I can perfectly understand why other people resonated with this film a lot. To be honest, the themes of this movie actually reminded me a lot of a different 2023 film, that being Past Lives, which is also a film about how the past is in the past, and you can never truly recapture the same relationships that you have with other people after years of being separated. Now yes, I do personally prefer Past Lives as I find it a lot better paced, as well as being equally as stunning visually as this movie, but that doesn't take away from how well handled Robot Dreams was with its messages. And this praise is without mentioning some of the other great aspects of Robot Dreams, such as the, well, Robot Dreams. Yeah, these sequences were really cool and allowed the visuals to truly shine. I especially love the Wizard of Oz sequence. Even if making a version of the Emerald City with the Twin Towers was certainly a choice? Great, now all I'm wondering is whether 9/11 happens in this universe. But in general, I found a lot of the robot scenes really great, and arguably more compelling than most of the slower scenes with the dog. I especially really loved that sequence with the birds. That was so sweet and wholesome, not gonna lie. So overall, I wouldn't say that I love Robot Dreams as a whole package, as I still think that it would have truly shined as a 40-minute short, or hell, even a 60-minute movie. But it still has so many moments which I do love, such as its themes and especially its ending. It's a film that's honestly growing on me the more that I think about it, and I can honestly see it being ranked higher if I gave it another watch. Although, because of how positive I am on most of the films in this list, I'd argue that Robot Dreams still has a very good placement on this ranking at this current moment, and I would highly recommend checking it out. Oh, and if you love this film and haven't yet seen Past Lives, then check that one out too. It's also a brilliant film, even if it doesn't have September in its soundtrack.
Nothing sounds alive.
A cab! Why is there a cab in the sea?
Song of the Sea was a really great movie. I enjoyed quite a lot about it. However, I really don't understand the insane praise that it has gotten over the years. Like, it's got a 4.2 rating on Letterboxd, and it's currently the 8th highest rated film on this list, and a lot of people go on record to call this one of the greatest animated films to come out of the 2010s. But I really don't get it. I'm sorry, but something about this film just didn't click with me like it did for so many other people. Now, to be fair, it is possible that I felt this way simply because the film wasn't my thing. It's also possible that I struggled to connect with it because I wasn't in the best mindset whilst watching, as I did have a cough during my viewing, just like Saoirse in the movie, and so my enjoyment could have been hindered by that to some extent. However, I think that the most likely possibility for why I didn't love this film as much as other people do is because I actually had some legitimate flaws with it, which I'm going to talk about here. Feel free to give rebuttals to all of my points in the comments though, I really want to love this movie more. So, let's start off with the biggest problem, which I think kind of impacts the whole movie, and is the most significant reason for why I found myself not entirely clicking with the final product. I'ma be totally honest, I didn't really like the ending very much. And the reason for why is because I felt like it kind of undercut some of the earlier drama present within this film. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in order to explain myself, I'm going to have to give some context about the film as a whole. Basically, Song of the Sea is a story about loss and grief and how it can impact upon a person, even to the point that they act unfairly towards others. This is primarily shown through the sibling dynamic between Ben and Saoirse. Basically, Ben is, for the lack of a better word, an absolute dickhead to Saoirse. He bullies her and is always writing her off and putting her down, and the reason for why he acts this way is because of the loss of his mother during Saoirse's birth. Now, it's never explicitly stated why Ben began acting like a dick after this incident, but the implication that I got from this film was that Ben subconsciously blamed Saoirse for his mother's death. As in, he probably believed that it was complications with Saoirse's birth, which led to the death of his mother, as he obviously didn't know the fantastical truth at the time. However, Ben's arc over the course of this film allows him to come to terms with his grief, and eventually, he learns to no longer blame Saoirse for what happened, and instead, he acts like the kind, older brother who he was meant to be. Now, all of this is great. I've got no problems with this arc. I thought that it was really strong and was quite a unique approach to grief, and it also works as an interesting contrast to Brendan Gleeson's grief, as his character just drinks away his sorrows on Saoirse's birthday, because that's the day where he's always reminded of his wife's death. Both of these approaches to grief are damaging to an individual in some way, and it was satisfying to see the pair move on past it, especially Ben. At least, that's what I was thinking. Until it was revealed that the mother wasn't actually dead. Yeah, in reality, she actually just buggered off for 6 years for external fantasy reasons, which weren't elaborated upon very much. And this ending reveal just left me with so many questions, which all ended up severely undercutting the emotional weight that I should have been feeling within these final moments, as I was too busy thinking rather than feeling. And then, after appearing out of nowhere for an ending reveal, the mother then has to leave again for yet another poorly explained reason, and by this point I'm just left with more questions than answers. Now, I don't usually mind ambiguous endings within films, but I think the presence of one within this movie was unnecessary. But the real reason for why I take issue with this ending is because my flaws with it ripple throughout the rest of this film, as I can't fully immerse myself into the story about grief when there is now no longer anything to grieve about, as the mother was alive the whole time. I mean, I know the characters thought she was dead, and I know that she did have to leave again at the very end of the film, but that doesn't change the fact that it has now become much harder for me to buy the feelings of grief felt by the characters, because I know that the person who they are grieving for is still alive somewhere else. And I think that this major feeling that I developed as a result of this twist reveal ended up harming Ben's story quite a bit. Whilst Ben was a dickhead in this film, the implications which came out of his grief over his mother's death allowed him to remain somewhat sympathetic in a way. The way that he treated Saoirse was wrong, but you could at least understand him and sympathise with him somewhat. But now that we know that his mother was alive throughout the entire runtime of this movie, I can't shake off the feeling that it just makes Ben look like a prick who had no excuse to act the way that he did. At least, that's how I start to feel. Now, this next problem that I have is admittedly pretty minor, but I nonetheless felt pretty strongly about it. Why couldn't Saoirse remain non-verbal? Oh yeah, I forgot to say, throughout most of this movie, Saoirse can't actually speak, in spite of the fact that she's already 6 years old. Now I'll be honest, I was actually really pleased to see some mute representation within this movie, and I also figured that it could lead to some interesting drama, as Ben and Saoirse can't communicate properly, which most likely played a part in limiting their bond. I just thought that there was so much that you could have done with this idea. Maybe there could have been a storyline near the end of the film where the characters have to find a new way to save the magic because Saoirse can't sing the titular Song of the Sea. I don't know, I was just really excited to see how this plot point would pan out. And then she just suddenly finds her voice in the ending through some fantasy magic stuff. Really? Yeah, I was kind of annoyed by this, to be honest. Now, I definitely don't mind the idea of Saoirse developing the ability to talk by the end of the film, as it was never implied that she would be permanently mute. But I wish that it happened as a result of natural causes, rather than fantasy reasons, and I wish there was just a few words in a similar vein to real life, as, you know, it does take a little while for an individual to be able to fully speak properly. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that I don't have a problem with Saoirse saying just 1 or 2 words, but I do have a problem with the fact that she gained the ability to sing flawlessly out of the blue as a result of some fantasy BS. I don't know, I'm probably caring way too much about this, but it still annoyed me nonetheless, and that, coupled with my problems with the mother's return, made it so I didn't really think that this film stuck the landing very well, and as a result, it led to me feeling slightly less satisfied with this film in comparison to most other people. Now granted, I do have some other flaws with the rest of this film, such as with the pacing, which I felt slowed down a bit too much around the middle. However, these other flaws were honestly a lot more minor by comparison, and I can honestly see them no longer being flaws for me in the future. Whereas, the ending was something that I could legitimately criticise, and I'll probably only change my mind on it if I hear some great rebuttals in the comments. However, in spite of my issues with how this film wrapped up, I really don't want to give you the impression that I dislike this movie, because I really don't. I do still really like this film on the whole, and there is a lot that I can praise to the ends of the earth here. I simply just wanted to draw a lot of attention to my flaws, because this movie is so popular that I felt like I really needed to justify its placement in the ranking. But, all things considered, there were still significantly more good things to come out of this movie than bad, and I'm gonna go over those things now. First of all, as you would now expect from Cartoon Saloon, the animation and music is absolutely stellar here. I mean, it was already fantastic in The Secret of Kells, but it's somehow even better in this film. The magic and whimsy of this new world is presented in an utterly breathtaking way through the visuals. Yet, I was also surprised by how well done the scenes set within contemporary Ireland were. You see, all the other Cartoon Saloon movies are either set in the distant past or in non-Western settings such as Afghanistan. However, Song of the Sea breaks this norm, and instead features bustling Irish cities and traditional cars and whatnot. But despite that, it still works for me, and it still fits within the style, even though I assumed that it wouldn't. So yeah, the visuals are utterly fantastic here, but the music is where this movie truly shines. Yeah, big surprise, a movie called Song of the Sea has beautiful music. What else were you expecting? Yeah, I think that's all I really need to say about that. And alongside these technical attributes, I also loved how unique this film was. The settings and the various wacky magical beings present here are unlike anything else I have ever seen in a movie, and that includes The Secret of Kells. These two films feel radically different despite treading on some similar ground in terms of Irish folklore, and I definitely think that it's good that I'm able to make this clear distinction between films like this. And in general, I'd say that the fantasy elements of this movie did successfully evoke many feelings of awe and wonder within me. I was honestly fascinated by this world, and I just wanted to see more from it. And on the subject of the fantasy elements, I really liked the stuff with the Owl Lady. I honestly thought that her story related to the impact that grief can have on someone was actually a lot more successful in execution than Ben's. Basically, the Owl Lady's son was so caught up in his own grief that he ended up crying an entire ocean. Hey now, we've all been there. And this ended up impacting the Owl Lady just as much as it did her son. So much so that she ended up turning him into stone and depriving him of any feelings whatsoever, just so that she wouldn't have to listen to his cries anymore. She just couldn't handle it. Now I thought that this was a great way to show how grief can affect people indirectly, as those who exist around a person who's been hurt are always impacted as well for various reasons. And this plotline also showed the problems with misguided compassion. Owl Lady didn't want to bring harm to her son, quite the opposite in fact, but her misguided attempts to stop his sorrows led to greater problems for a lot of people. I just thought that the messages here were really strong and were executed a lot stronger than Ben's story, because the grief ended in a more natural way as the characters grew and evolved past it, instead of having this Deus Ex Machina resolution.
I'm not dead!
But I just want to remind you that I do still really like Ben's storyline within this movie in spite of everything. I just think that the stuff with the Owl Lady was better. Anyway, what else is great here? Well, Chew the Dog is a legend. I thought that the first act was really strong, and I did admittedly really enjoy the climax sequence, right up until the ending. It was tense, captivating, and the music and animation were both dialed up to 11, which helped to create something that felt truly beautiful, yet dangerous at the same time. It was truly stunning. So all in all, Song of the Sea was a really gorgeous movie which I would happily rewatch and recommend to other people. However, I just don't entirely understand the reputation that it has developed over the years, especially as there are two other Cartoon Saloon movies which are just way better in every way. Oh well, hopefully opinions on this movie will improve for me in the future, and I can grow to love it just as much as everyone else does. We can only hope. But for now, all I have left to say is this. That fucker from 2015 who called this Irish movie one of those, and I quote, Chinese fucking things, deserves to have their face shoved into the nearest cake in their vicinity. What an absolute wanker! Anyway, let's move on.
We're going back in time to the first
Oscar!
And we have returned to the very first Academy Awards to feature this category, the 2001 lineup for the 74th Academy Awards. And this time, instead of looking at the forgotten middle child, we are looking at the winner of the award, the granddaddy to all future Best Animated Feature winners, Shrek. Somebody once told me the world is gonna roll me. I ain't the sharpest tool in the shed. She was looking kinda dumb with a finger and a thumb in the shape of an L on her forehead. Well, the years start coming. Why am I doing this? A movie which is still really good 20 plus years later, in spite of what the memes would have you believe. Now, do I think that Shrek is the most perfect movie ever made? No. Do I still think that it's a great movie though? Oh, absolutely. Despite appearing on the surface to be a comedic jab at Disney, Shrek is still a really strong film with a lot of heart present underneath its onion layers. In spite of what its appearance would have you believe, Shrek works as well as it does thanks to its own strong story. It isn't a substanceless parody movie. Instead, at the core of this film, we have a brilliant, timeless story all about self-acceptance, starring a character who's been shunned from society until he learns to love himself and open up to others. This is what the film is first and foremost. It's not the jokes or the Disney parodies which are at the core of this film. It's the heart, and that is what makes Shrek work so well. The thing is, most parody movies are terrible because they're just a load of crude jokes with no substance to them whatsoever. Now granted, there are definitely some good parodies that exist out there, the works from Mel Brooks and the Zaz team come to mind, but they only work because the jokes are just generally much better on the whole. But the films in question aren't exactly deep or anything, even if some may have a bit of satire to them. However, the vast majority of parody movies are, to put it mildly 007, absolutely awful. In fact, my least favourite movie of all time is Disaster Movie, which is an endlessly crude, vile, worthless viewing experience which barely contributes as a movie, and I despise it with every fibre of my being. Yet Shrek, despite being a crude comedy, avoids all of these pitfalls by prioritising its story and characters over its parody goals. Shrek himself is a character that the audience can easily see themselves in. He's judged before people get to know him, and he's stuck having to live alone. He appears content on the outside, but deep down, he's lonely. But he does begin to open up to others over time, after they see and appreciate his hidden layers, as Shrek is a layered character, just like an onion. He isn't just the mean ogre that the characters think he is, or the walking talking Disney caricature who the audience thinks he is. Instead, he subverts these expectations and becomes a compelling, relatable character who the audience enjoys following. And Shrek's not the only character who's a lot more than how they appear to be on the outside, as there's also Donkey. Now, I think that I, and a lot of other people, forget how crucial Donkey actually is to this film. You see, he is a key part of Shrek's character arc, as he was the one who made it easier for Shrek to open up to people like Fiona. He was the first character to not be scared of Shrek, and instead chose to befriend him instead. And this friendship between these two characters are essential to the overall narrative, and is arguably more important than Shrek's romance with Fiona, as it was this relationship which made Shrek realise that he really does want companionship rather than loneliness. And there's certain scenes between them, like the one underneath the moon, which works really well as a catalyst for Shrek's growing character arc. Therefore, Donkey is so much more than just the comic relief side character. He's instead crucial to this movie, whilst also still being really funny. Fiona also plays a similar role to Donkey here, due to aiding Shrek's character arc of opening up to others. However, alongside that, she's funny, badass, and a great subversion of the princess stereotypes. But there's that word again, subversion. The subversion of fairy tale tropes, specifically Disney tropes, are a key part of the identity of this movie. And as a result of this fact, some people may see this movie in quite a negative light as a result of the cynical nature of its inception. It was designed to be Jeffrey Katzenberg's bitter dig at Disney, and that is exactly what it is. And criticising the movie for that reason is fair enough, I'd say, but I personally see the subversions and spoof as an essential way to aid aspects of this story. This is most notable within the ending, where the audience's expectations are subverted after Fiona has a Beauty and the Beast style transformation, where she remains ugly instead of turning beautiful after kissing Shrek. This moment is able to show just how much of an impact Shrek has had on someone else, and it generally presents a much more positive message about loving yourself for who you are. Once again, the subversions aren't just thrown into the movie for cheap laughs, they are essential to the story and they aid Shrek's relatable character arc. I just can't emphasize enough that Shrek works as well as it does because it is an intelligent film first and a funny parody of Disney second. But with all that being said though, the parody stuff is still really funny here. Scenes like the Robin Hood musical number and the whole Dragon's Castle sequence are just comedy gold. And alongside that, the inclusion of pop culture references and popular songs fits so well within the identity of Shrek. You see, this isn't your typical Disney film, this is something completely different. Therefore, the use of pop music instead of traditional musical songs emphasizes difference perfectly. The All-Star opening is easily the best example of this. I know we all love this opening for the memes and everything, but when putting that aside, it is just such an effective way to set the stage for this film, and it perfectly shows how this won't be anything like Disney. And alongside All-Star, the rest of the soundtrack is also fantastic. You see, this movie isn't just a 2001 greatest hits medley, as all of the songs actually have a thematic reason for their inclusion, because they usually cleverly tie into the events or emotions of a scene. Everything from Bad Reputation, Monster and Me, and Hallelujah all work so well within the context of their scenes, and the great music eventually culminates in the ending I'm a Believer dance party, which is rightfully iconic. In my mind, there are only a few films which can get away with an end-of-movie dance party, with one of those films obviously being The Nut Job, but Shrek is definitely another one of those few films which just works with it. And as for the film's humour, I am honestly always surprised by how natural feeling the comedy in this film actually is. Thanks to all of the memes, it can be hard to remember that the humour of this first movie doesn't actually come from the writers actively throwing jokes at the audience constantly. Instead, the funniest moments of this film simply come from the actors' line delivery. That's the reason for why the onion scene is so iconic. The actors just play off each other so well, and they all fit their characters perfectly, which thus leads to their line delivery being utterly pitch perfect. I just can't imagine Shrek without Myers, Murphy and Diaz, and that opinion really goes to show how these guys are so much more than the celebrities who play them. They weren't cast just to attract audiences. They were instead the best fit for the roles. So yeah, Shrek is a banger and we all know why. It has a fantastic story, brilliant messages, and wonderful characters. I can totally understand why it was so popular back in the day and why it has endured in pop culture all these years later. But now, you may be wondering why I'm not as head over heels in love with this first movie in comparison to everyone else. Well, the thing is, I do have some flaws with this movie. The first being Lord Farquaad. Now yes, he's definitely an entertaining villain, and John Lithgow absolutely kills it behind the mic, but for me, Farquaad is really lacking when it comes to being a substantial threat, and in comparison to other Shrek villains like Rumpel and the Fairy Godmother, he really stands out as being nowhere near as good. Although, in saying that, he does become a lot more intimidating after you see John Lithgow in the show Dexter. Lithgow's got such a distinctive voice, which means that whenever he spoke in Shrek, I just kept imagining the Trinity Killer, which is pretty terrifying, let me tell you. So yeah, whilst I still enjoy Farquaad for various reasons, I don't love him, and he isn't the best villain in the world. Oh, and on the topic of Farquaad, I have to say that some of the jokes in this movie really don't land for me, and the most egregious examples of this are all the jokes about Farquaad's height, which are really annoying and pretty dated, I feel. Although, alongside these obvious blunders, some of these pop culture references haven't held up the best, and some definitely make this film feel very 2001, rather than feeling timeless. But these are minor issues, all things considered. The big problem that I have with this movie, however, comes in the form of the forced misunderstanding plotline, which I have never been a fan of because it is pretty boring and cliche. Now yes, I do get its thematic purpose, as it is meant to be a way to show Shrek's insecurities. However, I really think that it could have been handled in a much less played out way. Maybe have Fiona actively tried to turn down Shrek because of her curse, but before she can fully explain why, Shrek's insecurities get the better of him, and that's why they split up. I don't know, I'd rather have something a bit more unique than this. In spite of all of that though, Shrek is still an absolute banger at the end of the day, and whilst I don't quite think it is the best film from the 2001 lineup, I still definitely think that it deserved to win the first Oscar for this category for a multitude of reasons. For starters, DreamWorks hasn't won an award for any other year because whenever they create a good movie, it's always up against something else which is more favourable to the Academy, whether it be Pixar, Disney, Guillermo del Toro, or a cat made in Blender. Yes, Aardman won an Oscar whilst under DreamWorks, as we will discuss later. However, DreamWorks themselves haven't won the award any other time, so it's nice that they were recognised at least once in the past. And the second reason for why I think Shrek deserved the Oscar is because this win showed the world that competitors to Disney and Pixar were indeed possible, and other studios could create films which could rival the movies from those big studios, both financially and critically. Shrek's win marked a major turning point for animation. Now yes, some of the changes that Shrek brought to the medium were definitely, shall we say, problematic, although I don't think it's really fair to blame Shrek for these missteps, as it was more so the fault of stupid corporate executives who misunderstood Shrek's appeal. However, this win nonetheless brought about a degree of healthy competition, which helped to give us all many films which we will go on to love. Therefore, for that reason, I'm glad that Shrek won. I may have some flaws a bit, but Shrek is nonetheless a fantastic film through and through, which I never get tired of rewatching. I don't need to tell you all to give it a go, as I know you've all seen it. Oh, and one final thing. If you want to know my thoughts on Shrek 5 so far, I'll save my thoughts when the movie actually comes out.